Hello, time for another vlog. I'll try and keep it shortish. I just wanted to talk about whether the Great Awakening can beat the Great Reset. My voice has gone a bit funny. Not using it enough, perhaps. I know I haven't done many vlogs or even walkabouts, but I haven't had much to say of that's unique, so that's it. And if I don't feel like walking around somewhere, then I don't. The weather's been a bit funny anyway lately, over here in jolly old Blighty, England. It's sunnyish today, but a bit too windy for the microphone. Anyway, the Great Reset and the Great Awakening. I'll describe them a bit. I mean, essentially my thesis is that we must wake up, as it were, or die, basically. That's the situation the world faces at the moment. We have a number of interacting crises. Obviously at the moment, this is January 2022, we have the fairy dust issue, you know, the thing from the Celestial Kingdom, still. And in good old Britain, the government has decided that with 150,000 cases a week and maybe 200 or 300 people dying every week, it's okay to lift the restrictions. Yes, this is the world we live in. Britain also has the highest number of cases, and indeed is the hardest hit of the developed economies. Harder hit even than Italy. So there you go. Because government policy really is to do nothing, roughly speaking, or when you do something, do it wrong. Anyway, and do it too late, and too little, and so on. Anyway, that's one crisis which is affecting the whole world, and probably worse here than anywhere else. In some respects. They've had it pretty bad in many countries. And being a wealthy country, in fact, unless you're directly affected, it doesn't do you a lot of harm. Anyway, another crisis. Ukraine. The Russia problem, the Cold War, the Hot War. Now, I did a poll on Twitter a couple of weeks ago, and I only got 10 responses because, you know, I'm followed by so many people. But all 10 of them felt that the risk of a nuclear war from this conflict was 0 or 1%, and not any higher. But personally, I'll put the risk quite a bit higher than that, because it looks to me like Putin has decided to draw a red line, as we call it, over Ukraine, and NATO has been encroaching on Russia's borders ever since the fall of the Berlin Wall. And although they made a verbal agreement with Gorbachev not to swallow up Eastern Europe with NATO, they didn't sign a treaty to that effect, so they've just done it. We are governed by people with no honour, basically. And this is the outcome. Missiles on Russia's border, which can strike before they can probably defend themselves, or even detect them and decide what to do, because they're so close and so fast. And of course then Russia and China are now developing hypersonic missiles which can do the same in reverse over longer distances. But maybe they'll come up with an agreement. Probably they will. But I think the most dangerous time will be right after a peace agreement is signed, or made anyway, because if Putin then feels that the concessions that NATO has made are insufficient, then after a peace agreement has been made and people are starting to stand down and turn their attention elsewhere, that's the moment when the Russians have the greatest element of surprise. That's the moment when they have the best advantage if they want to strike. Just saying. Of course, living in Britain, I don't think we'd survive a nuclear war. Northern Europe, similarly. So there's that risk. However big it is, can't quantify it. But it's not zero. The other one, environmental disaster. People talk about climate change, but really it's wider than that. We are sucking up the Earth's resources. We need nearly 2 planets to feed our requirements. And so resources are dwindling, forests are being destroyed. When the climate changes, places like the Amazon will just turn into savanna. Millions of species will go. And the environmental system that we rely on to feed ourselves will change so dramatically that we probably won't be able to feed ourselves. And in that respect, a nuclear war might even be good for the Earth, because it would reduce the number of humans, and it would probably get rid of quite a lot of those in the ruling classes who are addicted to money and power. It would, of course, destabilise civilization dramatically, and we would see, I don't know what, chaos after that. I'm assuming it will be limited, mostly maybe a few nukes here and there, but still, Europe in particular is very densely populated, and Britain in the north, Northern Europe and Britain, so that will be it for us. So goodbye if this is the last video. See you in the next life. We also, of course, have endless wars around the world of, like Yemen and I don't know where else. There's exploitation of the third world going on. Colonialisation really hasn't stopped. It's just changed its face. We now have the World Bank to impoverish countries on our behalf and rip them off, and take interest payments and demand resources in order to cover their debts, and demand deforestation in order to cover their debts by planting cash crops and so on. This has not stopped. For all my life I've been watching environmental nature programs on TV and wherever. I don't have a TV anymore, but still it's on the internet. And nothing's changed. When the Club of Rome came out, where was it, with their book The Limits to Growth, here it is, back in 1971 I think it was, they warned that it was possible at that time to change direction and create sustainable economies based on limiting resource use, finding viable substitutes for crucial resources, and so on. We don't have the time anymore. We have run out of time. On their graphs, which they did, and which we are still on schedule with, I should say, we're on schedule with their standard run. I think it was on page 124, figure 35. Essentially, I marked the scale at the bottom. You probably can't see it because it's not viable to show it to you on this camera, is it? But there it is. Whoops, can you see it? There we go. There's the graph. It's all a bit much. You can freeze it if you like, but I marked the scale. 2025 is where things really start to take off, if I can put it that way. With resources crashing to below 50% by 2025, food per capita starting to collapse by 2025, industrial output starting to collapse by 2025, population continues growing until about 2050, which of course exacerbates the food shortages and so on. Industrial output tends to fall because pollution is increasing and extracting resources is becoming more difficult. When pollution increases, that affects food production, but it does affect industrial production too, because they're having to mess up the environment more, and well, actually it's not really pollution that's affecting that, they're causing it, but it's affecting food production and ultimately population. Yeah, and disease goes up and so on. So we are really close to the edge. The curves that we're on in real life are similar to the standard model from this book from 1971. Okay. This was a team of 100 scientists and thinkers and business people. Copyright 1972. There we go. We have ignored it completely. Okay, so, and we had our COP26 or whatever it is conference. Do you notice the world getting any better from that? I haven't seen anything come from it. It's just talk, because money. The thing is, our societies are not based on making things better for people, they are based on money and power. And the focus on money was intended originally to make it easier to benefit people. But now it's just the money focus, and people can look after themselves. Well, they can't, obviously. We're a community. And humans' big advantage in the natural world is that we work together to solve problems. If we do not work together, the problems will not be solved. And our population will crash. From one of multiple causes that I've mentioned, or more. Several of them, probably. This is where we come to the Great Reset, which is kind of the logical extension or logical conclusion of our corporate capitalist kind of system. Capitalism itself is not a bad thing. When Adam Smith described it in The Wealth of Nations back in 17 whatever it was, right, 18th century, he was describing a system based really on family businesses, and he warned against monopolistic corporate style business, and he warned against the mentality, the vile philosophy he called it, of everything for me and nothing for anybody else. But that is exactly the system which is promoted and in use today. Family businesses are effectively legislated against. They can exist, but it's very difficult for them to make a decent profit for themselves and their families. Small businesses are outcompeted by giant corporations, and the reason they are outcompeted is because those giant corporations, not that they're more efficient, but they do not pay for externalities. They don't pay for the pollution they create. That's paid by society. They don't pay for the low wages of their staff. That's paid by society, giving those people extra benefits. They hire graduates and give them not enough money to pay off their student loans. That again is paid for by society in the way of benefits. It's externalised. And hence those giant corporations are giant because they are predators. And they are not being controlled. And the logical conclusion of this is the Great Reset. You and I, ordinary people, will own nothing much. It will all be owned by a few giant corporations, and we will rent everything as a service, rather than owning it. So more and more money will be going through to these giant corporations, who are not paying the true costs of their businesses. We are. That's the Great Reset, essentially. Money. And our lack of it and their surplus of it. And the government will claim we can't do services, we have to have austerity because the government finances are in such a bad way, and they are. But actually, after World War II, government finances were in a terrible state. And still, they were able to print currency and make a national health service that worked in this country. In America, they've gone all private, and they have the worst health outcomes of the developed world. There are some advantages to private medicine. You can get it over here too in the UK, but it's usually not worth it for people, and it's obviously too expensive. 2/3 of bankruptcies in the USA are caused by medical bills. And I know the government here is privatising the NHS by stealth, outsourcing services to private companies who are doing it, some cases well, some cases badly. But the fact is, it worked better when it was properly controlled by the state. In my view, there are certain things. If you're looking after the welfare of people, there are certain things that need to be done by the state rather than privately. Unregulated markets are not a good thing because they have their own goal, profit, which is not the same goal as benefiting people. You can make profit by benefiting people, but you can make more profit by being a predator in an unregulated market. So what's the Great Awakening? There's a lot of talk of conspiracy theories online these days, and the media, of course, trying to suppress them and say, oh, it's silly, and they're, like the idea that the fairy dust escaped from a laboratory, or that 9/11 was an inside job, or something like that. Some of these they may be conspiracies, but they are what I would call true conspiracies. Some conspiracies. I suspect both of those are, but it's, we're not in a position to prove it, are we? But realising that let's say the powers that be are not to be trusted out of hand or willy-nilly, that there are people conspiring against the welfare of the public, is in fact the first sign of people waking up. Enlightenment, if you like. They are by no means enlightened when you're in that stage, but it's the first sign, realising that you are being lied to, basically. And gradually you go down the rabbit hole, you discover more and more apparent conspiracies and get very suspicious about what some people are maybe up to. Okay. And you can go right off the rails. Some people are just crackers. Okay. But it's still a step up from being asleep and not realising that you are being lied to most of the time by most of the powers that be. The politicians, the media in particular. The next stage of it is developing some discernment. That is, some conspiracies are what they seem to be. Could somebody be conspiring to reduce the world's population a bit of vulnerable people with a fairy dust from the celestial kingdom, and maybe another one now? A little known paper suggests that Omicron was actually around a year before Alpha, and also originated in the same city. It's thought it may account for a relatively high immunity in those parts of the world, because it spread slowly at the time, but did infect quite a few people around the world. When the breakout happened in Italy in 2019, later on it was found that actually people had antibodies all over the country already. So something had been there, unrecognised, and maybe mild. The current Omicron, people are saying it's mild, but it is not really. It's infecting far more people, and producing long COVID. Even if it's only a small percentage, the long COVID is very harmful. What the long COVID seems to be doing, among other things, is deactivating or killing T cells, immune cells. It actually kills more T cells than HIV does in these people. So potentially it's very dangerous. And I don't know if there's going to be another one on its way, because the world is not immunised or vaccinated, so there's plenty of scope for new variants, and who knows what's brewing in some of these laboratories, and whether it's deliberate or accidental. But there are some conspiracies which are perhaps plainly false, or are lies. So you may disagree with me, but I think that QAnon is one of those. Now, that was a conspiracy about children's blood being used by the elite to extend their lives, and they were always going on the media, the social media, saying it's happening, any day now the indictments are going to be released and these people are going to be prosecuted, and on and on and on. And the children are in boats being rescued, they're offshore at the moment, and of course nothing happened. It still hasn't happened, right? That conspiracy, I think, was a conspiracy, but it was a lie. And it was about, I think, putting Trump and keeping Trump in power. And I think he knew about it. Maybe not at the beginning, I'm not sure, but he certainly knew about it later from some of the jokes he made in his press conferences. Right. He was well aware of it, and it may be that it was a clever conspiracy, because it pulled people into the rabbit hole and made them vote for Mr. Trump. But maybe by the end of his term, enough people had realised that they were being conned and didn't vote for him again. So discernment is the next stage. Which conspiracies are real, which ones are lies, and which ones are just ridiculous. And you have some of the conspiracy peddlers, Alex Jones, David Icke. A lot of the things they say are quite possibly true. but they mix it in with total rubbish. Or, let's say, incredible stuff. In some parallel universe, what they say may even be true. I don't know. But for both of them and others, everything is a conspiracy. So when I see this, I mean, okay, I look at some of it and I say, okay, I can believe that, I can't believe that. But what they're doing, I think, is making money. And any business meeting is a conspiracy against the public to make money. And I think that's what these people are actually doing. They do take some conspiracies which are true and write about them and talk about them, but they mix it in with stuff which is not credible, really. And why are they doing that? I think it's because either they lack discernment or they're just not honest. But the fact that some of these conspiracy theories are probably true and are suppressed by the media, the powers that be, is because they don't want people to be waking up. Because if enough people wake up, they will want that power removed from these people who are abusing it. And the media are the poodles of the corporates. They are... Their job is to pacify the population, keep us asleep. One of the ways they do that is by conditioning. When you're at school, you go to a lesson. You might spend 90 minutes there, and then a bell rings. Like with Pavlov's dog, you get conditioned. Oh, drop everything. Forget this subject. Got to go on to the next one. Right. 90 minutes more, bell rings. Forget it. Go on with something else. Right. And in the media, even the so-called serious media, we have the news programs where they'll talk about a subject for a few minutes, depending on the channel, right? And then forget about it. So they might be talking about the possibility of nuclear war in Ukraine, right, for a few minutes. Then forget that. Let's talk about Khloe Kardashian's new dress, okay, for a few minutes, right? And then we'll talk about the weather. On and on, just story, 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 story. And even on a serious channel like BBC Radio 4, it's half an hour on this subject, half an hour on that, half an hour on something else. And we'll tell a story, and so on. All of these things condition your brain, subconsciously, to realise that all of this is unimportant. Right? There's no real focus. And this is why I think people find it really hard to remember what has happened in the news going back. And why people can get away with things because everybody's forgotten about it a few days later. Or a few weeks, certainly. We can't help it. We are taught from an early age that everything that we are told is unimportant. And at school we have to pass exams. And you don't actually have to remember very much to pass an exam, but it's difficult to do because you've been trained that it is all unimportant. Subconsciously. You may be told it's important to pass your exams and study because you can get a good job. That's another lie nowadays. It was true once upon a time. But in fact, the actual unconscious conditioning is that this is not important, chuck it. This is not important, chuck it. Again and again and again. And it carries on as adults when we listen to the news and TV programs and all the rest, one after the other. Even internet videos on YouTube, 10 minutes of watching people being scared of somebody leaping out at them, or 10 minutes of a documentary about something. Dush, dush, dush. It's very hard to focus. Attention span deliberately being shortened and shortened and shortened, so that all we can do is give our money to the powers that be for the next gimmick, for a few minutes to keep us entertained. And then along will come another one, and we can chuck that. Another thing the media spread is fear, uncertainty and doubt, of course, about all these crises, which unfortunately are very serious, and they're not doing anything about it, of course. But their plan is to spread the uncertainty, because a population which is suffering from fear, uncertainty and doubt, if they're taking these stories seriously, and some of them they should be, is one which is easy to control. When a population is worried, they listen to the government. They want the government to do something about it. And the government will do something to increase control, but that won't necessarily solve the problem. So awakening is the fix, but it needs to go a bit deeper than that. Because fundamentally our society is based on immorality, actually. So underneath all of this fixation on money and power is a fundamental immorality and lack of concern for other people. Our societies are sociopathic in nature, as are many of our leaders. The reason a politician like Bill Clinton can say it's the economy, stupid, when deciding what's going to win an election, is because people are uncertain about the health of their finances. They're in precarious situations, so they tend to focus on survival, which is getting enough money, and the government is deliberately withholding it. Society is deliberately withholding it from people, effectively. And so people focus on it, and our whole society is now predicated on the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, or being sucked to drive even the little money they've got. Low wages, high expenses, debts, compulsory debts almost, and in some cases definitely, benefits being withdrawn or reduced or being unreliable, homelessness increasing. All this is based on fundamental immorality, lack of concern for other people. Which comes from sociopathy and excessive ego. Autocrats are notoriously egotistic. And don't really see anything outside their own little bubble. So letting go of the self is the way. One way or another. But will this Great Awakening, which is happening slowly, will it beat the Great Reset? My feeling is it will not. It's too late. We're going to have to suffer a lot of environmental destruction, population reduction, industrial output reduction, maybe even nukes, before the world can change. I don't see us becoming extinct just yet as a species, but we need to get rid of the ruling classes and the ruling system as it stands and base it on a morality of actually based on concern for people rather than material concerns. The material should serve the well-being of people, not just be accumulated for its own sake, at the expense of people, indeed. So I think we're heading for a generation or two or more of serious crisis on this earth, but the Great Awakening will be promoted by that. I think if the war in Ukraine, or if the issue in Ukraine goes hot, the ruling classes might well be exterminated by it, actually, in large parts of the world. Not a good way for them to go, because it will take most of us with them, but it will speed up the awakening, I suppose. They've done a very good job of putting people to sleep, and the consequences are flowing, but we as individuals can wake up. Just let go of the self. Just as old Ben Kenobi told Luke Skywalker, let go, Luke, let go. Just be. Just be. Don't buy the conditioning. Just be and watch. When you're not worrying about things, I know there's lots of crises to worry about, but don't worry. Just be. Because you don't have much control over any of that. As all the gurus say, you have to focus on letting go of the self. It starts here. The world changes when we change. Bye for now. You can watch my other videos, by the way, on enlightenment and stuff, to get some more ideas on that, but improving morals and concern for others is a general way to go, and letting go of the self is a way that helps that too. So, bye for now. Comments? Disagreements? What are your thoughts?